The alert hits first. Not a whisper, not a rumor, but a scream. Mass protests. Hundreds killed. Cities on fire. The words blur together as screens light up across the world, each notification more alarming than the last. Tehran. Isfahan. Shiraz. Streets flooded with people, then flooded with blood. Sirens wail, gunfire cracks, and the night sky glows orange as if the earth itself is burning in protest. And then the image cuts. Air Force One.
Calm. Polished.
Controlled. The most powerful man on the planet seated beneath soft cabin lights, speaking with the confidence of someone who knows the weight of every word he drops. Donald Trump looks straight ahead and says the United States is weighing very strong options. Not diplomatic language. Not abstract warnings. Options that include military action. Options that redraw borders and end lives. Options that do not get unsaid once spoken. Two worlds collide in real time. On one side, Iranian citizens running through smoke-filled streets, clutching flags, clutching each other, chanting for dignity while armed forces move in with ruthless precision. Young faces twisted with fear and defiance. Mothers screaming names that echo unanswered. On the other side, American command centers hum with quiet intensity. Generals lean over digital maps. Satellites track movement. Red dots blink. Decisions are no longer theoretical. This is not history. This is now. Social media fractures instantly. Some call it overdue accountability. Others whisper the word everyone is afraid to say out loud. War. Immigrants watch with a special kind of dread, knowing these headlines are not abstractions, but echoes of stories they fled, scars their families still carry. For them, this is not foreign policy. This is memory knocking at the door. Trump's words ripple outward, crossing oceans in seconds. Tehran hears them. Washington feels them. The world pauses, holding its breath, asking the same unspoken question. The protests did not explode all at once. They spread like a whispered truth that finally found its voice. It began with empty wallets, rising prices, wages that no longer stretched to the end of the month. Ordinary frustrations turned into crowded streets, and crowded streets turned into something far more dangerous. In more than 100 cities, people poured out of their homes, not as radicals, but as workers, students, parents, and elders who felt they had nothing left to lose. What followed was brutal speed. Security forces moved in with batons, bullets, and blackout orders. The internet flickered, then vanished. Cell phones went dark. But the bodies did not. Reports climbed relentlessly. 500 dead. Then more. Over 10,000 detained, pulled from homes, from classrooms, from sidewalks, disappearing into a system designed to erase names. Each number carried a face, a family, a future abruptly interrupted. What shocked the world was not only the violence, but the persistence. These were not isolated riots. This was a national uprising stitched together by shared exhaustion and shared courage. Chants shifted from prices to power, from bread to freedom. The message hardened into something unmistakable. This was no longer about economics. This was about dignity,
About being seen.
about refusing to live small under permanent fear. For civilians, every day became a calculation. Do you stay home and survive or step outside and matter? Parents argued in whispers while their children watched the streets fill with smoke. Immigrants abroad recognized the posture of resistance instantly, the way people stand when they know history is watching, even if help never comes. Sympathy spread, but so did fear, because everyone knew how this usually ends. Inside Iran's corridors of power, the mood shifted from control to containment. A regime built on authority suddenly looked brittle, exposed by its own force. Power in Iran does not sit in one room. It spreads through robes, ranks, and rituals, binding religion to authority until dissent feels like heresy. At the top stands a clerical system that has ruled for decades by presenting itself as guardian of faith while quietly perfecting the machinery of control. Its survival has always depended on the same equation: obedience in exchange for stability, silence enforced by fear. When protests erupt, This system does not see citizens. It sees threats. The memory of past uprisings haunts the regime like a recurring nightmare, and every chant in the streets echoes with the possibility of collapse. That fear explains the speed, the severity, and the brutality. Crackdowns are not improvisations. They are rehearsed responses, refined through years of confrontation with its own people. The pattern is familiar. Demonstrations swell. Security forces deploy. Plainclothes units blend into crowds. Then the communications vanish. The internet blackout is never accidental. It is a strategic act of isolation, cutting protesters off from the world and from each other.
No videos. No coordination. No witnesses.
Darkness becomes a weapon, and silence becomes policy. In places like Fardis and Malikshahi, the consequences of that policy are carved into collective memory. Streets that once held markets and schoolchildren turned into killing grounds. Gunfire replaced slogans. Families ran toward the sound of their loved ones' voices and found bodies instead. These were not battlefields. They were neighborhoods. The victims were not enemies. They were neighbors, students, laborers, people who believed protest was a right, not a death sentence. The regime justified it all as order, as defense, as necessity. Official statements framed the dead as agitators, the detained as criminals, the mourning as exaggeration. But the truth moved quietly, carried by whispered testimonies and smuggled footage. Mothers who were never given bodies to bury. Fathers. Donald Trump has never fit neatly into the scripts that Washington prefers. He arrived on the global stage loud, transactional, and allergic to consensus, a leader who treated diplomacy like leverage and spectacle like strategy. Supporters saw strength where critics saw chaos. Allies braced, adversaries recalculated, and institutions learned that predictability was no longer guaranteed. His worldview hardened in moments of crisis. From missile tests to broken deals, from public threats to private back channels, Trump learned to speak in pressure. He believed ambiguity kept opponents off balance, and that hesitation invited exploitation. In his mind, peace was not passive. It was enforced by credibility and the willingness to act. That history matters now because it shapes how he reads Iran. Trump does not approach Tehran as an abstract policy problem. He approaches it as a test of resolve, a regime he believes understands force more fluently than persuasion. Every past confrontation, every walked-away agreement, informs the posture he takes when cameras turn on and stakes rise. In this moment, Trump's language sharpened. He spoke of red lines and very strong options, words chosen to travel fast and land hard. He framed the crisis as both moral and strategic, condemning violence while signaling that patience had limits. To his supporters, this sounded like deterrence. To critics, it sounded like provocation. Behind the statements was a calculation shaped by politics and power. Trump understands spectacle because he helped build it. He knows that words can move markets, shift alliances, and stiffen spines. In a media ecosystem that rewards certainty, he projects decisiveness, even when options remain fluid and outcomes unknowable. There is also a personal dimension. Trump's leadership thrives on confrontation, but it is not reckless in his telling. He prizes leverage, believing that appearing willing to go further than others creates space to pull back later. Television studios flicker with urgency as panels argue over maps and headlines, voices overlapping, urgency replacing nuance. Analysts warn of consequences, retired generals caution restraint, activists plead for lives on the line. Every sentence feels provisional, hedged by fear of being wrong. Viewers sense the gravity through clenched jaws and measured tones. The question dominates every screen: respond now or step back. In Washington, debates mirror the broadcasts, polished rhetoric colliding with raw stakes. No one speaks lightly. Each word lands like a marker, recording where leaders stood before history judges them. Silence stretches, amplifying the pressure between every breath. Inside the White House, the argument fractures along familiar lines. Advisors urging caution speak of unintended spirals, civilian casualties, alliances strained beyond repair. They remind the room that force rarely arrives alone, that it multiplies consequences long after cameras move on. Across the table, others press for assertive action, warning that hesitation emboldens repression. They argue credibility erodes when threats fade into delays. The room tightens as charts appear, timelines compress, options narrow. Everyone knows compromise satisfies no one. What matters is which risk feels survivable when the cost becomes unavoidable. Phones buzz with updates, allies calling, opponents watching, clocks ticking louder, urgency swelling, patience thinning, certainty elusive, stakes rising relentlessly around the table as pressure mounts, without mercy now. Across the ocean, Iranian leaders respond with defiance sharpened into warning. Statements threaten retaliation, promising that any strike will be answered, that American and Israeli forces will be targets. The language is deliberate, meant to signal strength to supporters and fear to adversaries. Yet beneath the bravado sits anxiety, the knowledge that escalation risks uncontrollable outcomes. The moment arrives without ceremony, but the gravity lands instantly. Cameras snap to attention as Donald Trump steps forward, expression measured, posture firm. He does not rush. He does not soften. He speaks as someone fully aware that every syllable will be replayed, dissected, remembered. The United States, he says, will take action if necessary. Not hypothetically. Not someday. If necessary. Then comes the pivot, deliberate and unmistakable. Iran, he adds, has reached out. They want to talk. Negotiations are on the table. But so is everything else. The sentence hangs in the air, balanced between restraint and threat. This is the mic drop moment because it refuses simplicity. Trump does not choose peace or war. He chooses leverage. To supporters, it sounds like strength with discipline. To critics, it sounds like escalation disguised as diplomacy. Either way, the world hears it clearly. The door is open, but the hammer is still raised. Experts flood the airwaves within minutes. Former diplomats argue this is classic pressure politics, an attempt to force concessions without firing a shot. Military analysts warn that mixed signals can be misread, especially by regimes trained to see weakness behind every pause. Human rights advocates fear protesters will pay the price while leaders posture. Each interpretation competes for dominance, amplifying the intensity of the moment rather than clarifying it. On social media, the reaction detonates. Clips of Trump's statement spread faster than context. Some hail it as the first responsible stance, claiming firmness is the only language authoritarian systems understand. Others accuse him of gambling with lives, of playing brinkmanship while civilians bleed. Immigrant voices rise sharply, cutting through abstraction. They speak of what it feels like when great powers debate options over your neighborhood, when maps replace homes, when strategy forgets faces.